Hello, my name is Anessa Fehsenfeld, and I'm the board chair of Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy. Today, during this session, we're going to be discussing the complexities of Duchenne and what you should know. I'm going to start out by talking about how PPMD attacks Duchenne from every angle. So PPMD is proud to have played a vital role in, I would say, every single victory in Duchenne since 1994. And, we're a group of very compassionate, strong, and innovative people who continue to lead this community. So we're going to take a quick look now at how we do this. Let's go to research. There we go. PPMD has invested in every single therapeutic possibility for Duchenne, equaling more than $50 million. Into that research. We take a comprehensive view of the entire landscape to identify opportunities that can accelerate the development of those therapies and to ensure that nothing is missed. Abby Bronson, our Senior Vice President of Research Strategy, will be talking a little bit more about how we do that. We invest in innovative research to fight the disease, no matter the mutation, the age, or the progression. So far, we've awarded over 260 grants, supporting nearly every major therapeutic target. PPMD's leadership in the Duchenne community has created an inflection point that has resulted in over 40 pharmaceutical companies getting involved in the Duchenne space, which is about $8 billion invested in research for Duchenne. And there's at any one time about 35 clinical trials in Duchenne. Since 2016, 2 therapies have been approved in Duchenne, with additional therapies approaching the regulatory finish line. PPMD plays a significant role in that process and in the process going forward. We convene thought leaders and community members to share their expertise and their experiences with regulators and decision makers. Advocacy. We provide advocates with the tools and the information they need to advance legislation and regulatory efforts that will ensure Duchenne is a priority across all government agencies. I would argue that no other rare disease health organization has come so far or so fast in the realm of congressional advocacy than PPMD. We drive paradigm-shifting federal legislation and have changed the Duchenne landscape through the passage of 4 federal bills and Duchenne-specific appropriations report language for more than a decade. And Annie Kennedy, our Senior Vice President of Legislation and Public Policy, will speak to how using advocacy to push the timeline to access treatments, or how we are using advocacy to push that timeline. We provide our community with the opportunity to raise their voices year-round through action alerts and messaging to Congress. And we convene our family through an annual advocacy conference. We also hold regulatory events, including federal advisory committee meetings and summits, and that's designed to inform regulators about the Duchenne patient experience. So consider this: since the MD Care Act was put in place in 2001, over $600 million has been invested in Duchenne by the federal government. And I would say that's largely in part to the advocacy efforts of PPMD and our community. Let's go to care. PPMD strives to ensure that people living with Duchenne live longer, stronger lives. And we do that by helping our community access expert health care, a comprehensive team of subspecialists, and cutting-edge treatments. And we've seen some really incredible advancements in the fight against Duchenne around those standards of care that have significantly improved the quality of life. Kathi Kinnett, who is our Senior Vice President of Clinical Care, will be speaking in a little bit about those improvements that we've seen through care. Since our founding in 1994, the average lifespan of a person with Duchenne has increased by 10 years. This incredible leap is not because of any drug interventions or treatments. It's because PPMD has pushed to advance care. We help families access optimal, standardized Duchenne care and services, and this is through our PPMD Certified Duchenne Care Center program. We've certified over 25 clinics across the United States, and we have more on tap, and we also would like to go international. That's over 700 care providers in PPMD's network. For over 20 years, in collaboration with clinicians, researchers, industry, and legislative bodies, PPMD has identified existing gaps in care and research, but then we work to convene meetings around developing the methodology to address and potentially fill those gaps. And then our community and engagement. You know, a Duchenne diagnosis can leave patients feeling isolated, overwhelmed, and confused. When my son was diagnosed 14 years ago, I can say that I felt that exactly. And I still get teary talking about it. But PPMD provided me a community and a way to connect. And they also gave me a voice. And that's exactly what they've done for our community. They've given us an opportunity to have a voice and to get around and share with all of these other families who have convened with us for our conference this week. Our annual conference gathers nearly 500 families each year to learn the latest in the progress to fight Duchenne, and I want to welcome all of you. Families also gather here for support, strength, camaraderie, and to hear from others on similar journeys. Sometimes it just helps to know you're not alone. We've established local PPMD Connect groups in 26, I believe it is now, regions across the United States. And that is a place for us to have local outreach and mentoring of our families, but to also provide them with a platform to advocate, fundraise, and educate their local community about Duchenne. PPMD connects the Duchenne community through the Duchenne Registry, and that's the only registry connecting Duchenne and Becker's patients and families with clinical trials, care, and research. Another way to connect is through running. I just ran my first half marathon in January. I say ran. I don't know if I can say ran. I almost ran the whole thing. But I also direct a 5K locally in my hometown for Parent Project. And then I trained really hard for the 0.1K that we held also locally. But you know, our Race to End Duchenne program is, it brings hundreds of people together, families together to participate in everything from the marathon down to the 0.1K. And it helps us to raise awareness around the country for Duchenne. It's really incredible. Since 1994, our grassroots fundraisers and our Race to End Duchenne program has raised over $36 million. And that's because of a lot of people that are sitting here in this room, that are listening to this on live stream, and I just want to say thank you. Finally, PPMD gives our community a voice, and Ryan Fischer, our Senior Vice President of Community Engagement, is going to speak about the importance of the patient voice, and we need you. We're going to be holding a patient polling at the very end of this session, so please stick around because we need your opinion. Your voice matters. We at PPMD have convened meetings and summits for our families to tell your stories on patient panels. With your help, we've conducted 5 patient-focused benefit risk studies, and participating in patient-reported outcomes and preference studies, we've published reports and white papers to inform industry trial design, FDA decision-making, and payer determinations. And this is really just a snapshot of what we do. Everything we do and everything we have done since our founding in 1994 helps people with Duchenne live longer, stronger lives. And speaking on behalf of PPMD's Board of Directors and a very committed staff at Parent Project, only a few of them are up here, I can confidently say that we will not rest until we end Duchenne for every single person who's fighting this disease. Thank you. All right, we're going to turn it over to Abby Bronson.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think you now all know who I am. And usually I start out a talk by thanking the organizers of the meeting, but today I'm going to thank all of you because I know how hard it is to travel from far distances with boys in wheelchair, with equipment, and it's so just thanks all of you for being here today. So in the short 20 minutes that I have, I'm going to try to give you an overview of the research and clinical trial landscape and some of the activities that PPMD is doing to support this. I'm also going to talk a little bit about some of the, you heard earlier in today from Cliff and Craig talk about some of the barriers to clinical trials and what are the things that PPMD is doing to accelerate that, that process. It's great if we have all these wonderful research compounds, but if they take too long to get through the clinical trial process, it's not doing your boys right now much good. So this is what we commonly refer to as our spider web chart, and it shows all the different therapeutic approaches in Duchenne. And I think if you were Pat starting out on this journey 25 years ago, if you guys all had a pair of glasses that blocked everything out on this slide except for inflammation and the word steroids, that's all that there was probably 25 years ago. So we've really come a long way in trying to understand the multi-systemic nature of this disease and all the different pathways and targets that we can study to try to find a cure. Because that chart is so busy, I like to break it into two parts. So this top part is what we call dystrophin restoration or replacement strategy. So you all know that the disease is caused by the lack of dystrophin. So these therapies on this top section, they're looking for ways to increase, like bring back the expression of dystrophin. So we have the exon skipping technology. We have one approved therapy that's an exon skipping strategy. We have second generation exon skipping compounds that are being looked at, and we have other exon skipping products that are in trials, and I'll be talking a little bit about them later. We have gene therapy, which is very exciting and holds lots of promise for our boys, and that is using a viral vector to deliver a microdystrophin because the full-length dystrophin will not fit into that viral capsid. We're also using AAV therapy to deliver other dystrophin-like proteins that could have benefit, and we're also using it, we're exploring it's being used to deliver an antisense sequence, so much like exon skipping, but it's being delivered via gene therapy. On the right-hand side, we have the stop codon read-through strategy, and then we have CRISPR, which is very exciting. It's a little bit longer away than some of the other therapies. So that's that top half. Those are the dystrophin restoration. They're attacking the primary cause of the disease. So then if we move on to what actually Dr. McDonald this morning referred to as foundational therapies, these are the symptoms. These are all the things that we can look at that happen because of the absence of dystrophin. So there's this inflammatory cascade, so we're looking at inflammation and fibrosis because of cell death and some of what happens to the cell membrane. The calcium regulation gets dysregulated, and there's therapies in looking at that. We have, we're looking at ways to protect the muscles and help the muscles grow, and we have the Roche study that's going on right now is an anti-myostatin, and that is exactly what it's trying to do, help that muscle growth. We've also realized how important the heart function is, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, but there's strategies that are directly impacting the dystrophic heart. We know that cardiac muscles are not the same as skeletal muscles, and so we have to look at those especially. So I thought I'd just step back a little bit, and I think probably looking at that, quote, spiderweb chart and seeing how busy it is and complex it is, and there's those multiple pathways. After ALS, Duchenne is the neuromuscular disease with the second largest drug development pipeline. So this is pretty exciting. This is a pretty good place for us to be. I also thought, along with what Anessa was just talking about, how much has been spent in Duchenne over the years, this is what our research funding portfolio looks like right now. And this is not on an annual basis because we don't give out grants a year at a time. Some of them are spread over multi-years. I think the longest one is spread over 5 years. But the real takeaway from this slide is there is significant investment in the coming therapies, the foundational therapies, those tools that we're trying to develop to accelerate the clinical trial process, the foundational work of trying to understand the natural history, and we also have an investment in robotics, which is especially helpful for some of our older boys. And this all would not be possible without you. So now going back to these dystrophin restoration and replacement strategies, and you're going to be hearing a lot from the sponsors over the next couple days who are going to go in depth into their trials, but I thought I'd just give you an overview so you can sort of orient yourself over these next 2 days. So I took all the clinical trials that fall under that dystrophin restoration or replacement category, and I mapped them out in terms of where they are in their clinical trial process. And as you can see, we have one, exon dys 51, the first line actually should be in the post-market. That's a little typo right there because it has been approved and is now accessible to patients. But as you can see, there's about 3 or 4 other exon skipping therapies that are in various stages of clinical trials. And that's really exciting because, as you know, that's just going to widen the number of patients that could possibly benefit from an exon skipping therapy. We have the 3 the AAV gene therapy trials that are, the gene is a microdystrophin, and you'll be hearing from all 3 of those companies tomorrow. And then we have the gene therapy, some of the other dystrophin-like proteins that are being used, such as we have the DUP2, that's the last one on the bottom, that Audentis, I believe, will be speaking about. We have GAL-GT2 that is advancing in the clinic, and we also have the follistatin gene therapy. So if we look at the clinical trials in Duchenne that are foundational in nature, are treating the symptoms that are caused by the absence of dystrophin, you can see that we have a wide variety of trials in the pipeline. We have 2 that are approved. We have Emflaza, spironolactone, and eplerenone, which is they're both repurposed drugs, and that trial has been complete, and you can read published results. And they're both being used. That was for cardiac, and now actually spironolactone is being looked at in skeletal muscle, and I believe there's a poster that's going to be presented on this, so you might want to be on the lookout for that. So anyhow, there's a lot of activity in the clinical trial space. When you put it all together, it looks like this. It barely fits on one slide. And PPMD has been involved in every single one of these trials in some aspect. So now I'm going to go back to this slide where I told you that we have the second largest drug development pipeline, which is true, and that it's a really good place to be, but it also comes with its challenges. And because of the amount of activity that's in the space, the number of clinical trials, there's this early phase pipeline pressure that we're experiencing. And we heard about it this morning. It's hard to enroll trials. Trials take a long time. There's just a lot of challenges that come with being in this really wonderful place with lots of attention being focused on us. And this is the result of some analysis that I did a couple years ago. And just by using data from clinicaltrials.gov, I tried to plot by age the number of patients needed to fill all the phase 2 trials that were in clinicaltrials.gov. And it came out to almost 4,000 patients. And they're all within the age ranges of about 5 to 15 years old. So that is this sweet spot. And that is one of the problems. That's a challenge in Duchenne, that all these trials are trying to recruit from the same patient population. This is some of the results of the live polling. I think that the live polling started, and we're doing it again this year. And the results of this, what it says is that, your responses last year when we asked you about what would 2 of the greatest needs in the clinical trial landscape, you wanted the trials to be open to all patients. Every single boy, no matter of stage, wants to be able to contribute data and feel like there's research that's relevant to them. And also, as Pat mentioned, limit the use of placebo. You don't have time to be on a placebo for 1.5 years. That is just too long. So we know these problems. The inclusion-exclusion criteria are just way too narrow. I talked about how hard it is to travel. The trial sites are too far away. We sometimes hear that it's, that's a huge part of the decision-making process about getting into a trial, like how difficult will it be? We have this problem where the boys can age out because of the time that they take after only one study. So sometimes we hear Pat say, we have one shot to be in a trial, and that's just because of the time that it takes to get through the whole process. The randomization to placebo problem, and just the inefficiencies. I mean, I think you heard Cliff, Mr. Bechtold, say how, a company spends $20 to $40 million per trial. That is a lot of money going into this one trial. So a couple years ago, Dr. Woodcock and Dr. Lavange from the FDA, they wrote a paper called Master Protocols to Study Multiple Therapies, Multiple Diseases, or Both. And what this paper looked at was a lot of experiences from oncology where they were suddenly realizing that they could gain efficiencies by having this one overarching protocol design. And sponsors came in and a form of collaboration. They used that infrastructure that was built, and they used that same protocol. And the trial, like enrollment, was faster. There's just a lot of efficiencies that were generated by using this kind of trial design. And the two hallmarks of this kind of trial design is this common trial network with infrastructure, and then this use of a common protocol, which uses these very innovative statistics to allow some of this adaptive trial design. So we got introduced to this concept a couple years ago. I think last year at this meeting, I very broadly introduced the idea of a master protocol. Now we're calling it a platform trial because that's the specific type of master protocol we're looking at, and we're moving forward with it. So what does it really do? What does this platform trial do? Well, it really brings efficiency. I'm borrowing this from some of the consultants that we work with, but it's the sports arena analogy, where you have an arena and there can be different games played in it, but there's different rules for one game, for one sport, there's different rules for the next sport, different vendors come in for different teams. Basically, it has to all be set up, the game's played, taken down. So is there a way to build a stadium that is set up for everybody to come? And there should be more. And you have this master protocol is essentially this overarching, like the rules of entry and play. Like everybody can come and play here at the same time as long as you follow these basic rules of entry and play. So that's kind of the idea of what a platform trial is. The platform trial brings many operational efficiencies. So you're going to have faster startup. You have these trial-ready sites. The contracting, which oftentimes you hear can take 6 months to a year. A central ILB is all ready, and there's the electronic data capture records are ready to go. So a lot of that startup time is just virtually eliminated. And the other part that I think comes with this standardized operation is this high quality execution and the level of data, the robustness of the data that we get back is much higher, and this also helps how the study is run. So I talked a little bit about the adaptive trial design and some of the innovative statistics. So I think probably the biggest efficiency is the shared placebo. And for you, we know that this is very important to you. There's also a sample size savings. So for sponsors coming in and trying to estimate how much it's going to cost to run a trial, this could play a factor in that calculation as well. The adaptive trial design also adds to the speed, the overall time the trial takes, because it allows for real-time decision-making. You're not waiting till the end of the trial and collecting every single last bit of data and then going back and doing all the analysis. There are midterm points where you can adapt and change. You can adapt the dose, you could add an arm, you could add more patients. There's different adaptations that you can build in, which allow it to be much more flexible and efficient. So where are we in terms of the development of this platform trial? So we've written a draft, our protocol synopsis, and we've presented that to the FDA, the regulators. We had lots of input from clinicians, from patients on that synopsis. We've had several meetings with the regulators. The last one, when we presented the synopsis, they were very, very supportive. There are some issues they really want us to dig into. They asked us to apply for a PIND or a pre-IND number so we can actually have a file which allows, it's a mechanism for them to give us actually formal binding guidance. So that's all really positive steps forward. We're in the process of doing that. We have our steering committee that's being put together, and it's being formed as we speak. Dr. Craig McDonald has agreed to be one of the co-chairs. The infrastructure, all that operational know-how is being developed. The biggest thing for you is we're having a community meeting on September 9th where we will be presenting this protocol, and everyone is invited. This is our chance to get input from the entire community. It's a community meeting, so we need input from sponsors, from clinicians, from regulators, and from you. So this will also be live streamed, I believe, so if you can't make it in person, please tune in. So we're really excited about this platform trial. It is a heavy lift. If you really think about it, I mean, and you look at what's happening in some other diseases, it takes time to put these together. It is pulling a community together. But every time the going gets tough, I step back and I think, what is right for the patients? This is what's right for you. So we plow on. So there's other things that PPMD is doing to help solve this problem of the length of time, the amount of time it takes to study a drug. And I think that Cliff mentioned this morning this idea of disease progression modeling. So we're part of two different consortiums, DRISC, the Duchenne Regulatory Science Consortium, which is run out of the Critical Path Institute, and the CTAP project. And both of them are modeling different aspects of the disease and different endpoints within the disease and developing a clinical trial simulation tool so that the sponsors, through simulation, will be able to test different parameters of their trial design. It will be regulatory ready, meaning that the regulators will have looked at, they're part of the process, they're helping us build it, so we know that it will be accepted by them. So we're really excited about both of these efforts, and they hopefully will help streamline things going forward. We've heard from researchers through different meetings and different gatherings that we've had that one of the issues that they struggle with is, in animal work and preclinical work, they come up with these hypotheses, but animals are not humans. You have to test the ideas in human cells. And that over time, we know that there probably are, and they say there's not a place for them to be able to get access to these human cells to be able to test their hypotheses. So we know over time through the NIH, through other funding agencies, that there probably are these samples out there. So one thing we're working on is setting up a biobank, which might be just a catalog, a list at the very start of what is out there and how do you access it. And then we could do the second step of trying to actually get more samples. But that is one effort that we're working on. I mean, I think you've heard about the need for biomarkers, which is just a measure of disease progression with or without treatment. And if we can find a biomarker that will help us in drug development, we might be able to design trials more quickly and more efficiently. Some of the things that we're looking at, I think you heard about the serum proteins, fat fraction measured we hear mostly by MRI, and the urine titin, which we heard this morning as well. We're also looking at specific biomarkers that could measure heart function because we know that that's very important. We held a meeting on inflammation and the immune response in Duchenne last December. And we realized that we're probably just on the surface of what we need to understand about inflammation in the disease. One thing that we really learned is there's much that we can learn from other pediatric inflammatory diseases and how they're looking at treating the disease. One of the follow-ups from the meeting was the biobank that I just talked about. We also learned, I think you all know that we recently funded Dr. Nagaraju of Binghamton to look into some of the immune responses for new dystrophin created from either exon skipping or AAV, because we think that there's probably more we need to learn about that immune response. We funded Carrie Michelli out at UCLA, who's helping us understand that immune response. So we're refining what we know about the inflammatory process in Duchenne, and hopefully this will help us with the drug development as we move forward. Another area where PPMD is really pushing hard, and I think we've also mentioned this morning, is the patient-reported outcome development. As you know, there's not an instrument that is applicable or relevant for all stages of Duchenne. So we're looking at various ways, and there are several initiatives that are underway in Duchenne that we're trying to move that forward. So lastly, I want to finish with our cardiac RFA. I think that we've learned a lot over the past, years, 10 years, many years, about what matters most, and that's the heart. We're really realizing that what happens in the dystrophic heart is starting out earlier than we thought. And I think that this information and this awareness is trickling down, but we need to know more. We also know, like I said at the beginning, that what the cardiac muscle is different from skeletal muscle. So we did an RFA early this year that was looking for innovative therapeutics and technologies that could help this generation of boys in cardiac Duchenne care and treatment. So we received 39 applications. We culled them down to 9. These were just letters of intent, 2-page letters of intent. We culled them down to 9 for a full review. We have our review committee set, and we'll be making awards this fall. And again, this cardiac RFA, it's thanks to you that we are doing this. This is our holiday campaign last year, and we're really excited that we're able to move forward with this. So that, in a nutshell, is what we're working on in the research and sort of drug development tool area in Duchenne. But my colleagues are up here because we are a mighty team, and even if we have more treatment options, we refine our understanding, we still have to make sure that these treatments are covered by payers. We have to continue to improve care and management, and there's more standardization that can happen. And of course, all along the way, the voice of the patient. You know your disease best, and we are always looking for ways to include that voice of the patient in informing all the work that's being done. So I don't know if I was fast or slow, but that is the end of my talk, and I'm going to pass it on to, I think, Annie. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. So I'm Annie Kennedy, and I help lead our legislative and policy initiatives. And as Abby said, we really work across our 4 pillars of research, advocacy, care, and engagement in a Venn diagram. So we're really presenting on these initiatives today, but we all touch all of them. I'm specifically going to talk about how our advocacy strategically really works to wrap around what we're doing across Duchenne to really ensure that we are ending Duchenne and ensuring access and reimbursement for the therapies that we're seeking. And while I'm presenting on this, we all work towards this together, and everyone in this room has been supporting these efforts. So you're going to, as I'm going through this, recognize a lot of the work that you've been doing on the Hill with us, some of the action alerts that you've been engaged in. There are a lot of clinical and industry partners who've been helping us move this forward. And in particular, Ryan Fischer, who's up here on stage with us, leads a lot of these efforts alongside me. So, and actually, I specifically chose this image of the Capitol because what I'm going to present on, I really think of as scaffolding. And we really strategically consider the work that we do in advocacy as building an infrastructure and a context to inform the decision-making for the many stakeholders who we engage with. And so Ryan is later going to talk about how we have been working very hard to transform the patient experience of our community into data that will be considered by the various stakeholders who we work with. What I'm going to be talking about is how we have worked to make sure that those stakeholders regard our data as highly as they regard the data of all of the other stakeholders in these ecosystems. And so we'll just go through that. Okay, so this is the drug development pathway that many of us have seen for many, many years. You'll see this a lot throughout this conference, and it starts with discovery and preclinical all the way through access or an approval. And Abby just spoke to how we've been really working to fund development through this space, and she showed our pipeline slide that showed how we really have a lot of really wonderful clinical trials in various stages along this pipeline. I'm going to talk through what we've been doing to ensure that we are informing the various decision points and pushing other data points along, and also working to make sure that products move as quickly as possible through this pipeline. And we now have approvals. So this is a really important time in Duchenne. I say it again. Okay. All right, so the first thing was the MD Care Act, and you heard Pat talk about this earlier, and I'm going to go through a lot of these things very quickly, but we have a lot of information on our website. We've had blogs. So if you want more on any of these topics, or this is your first meeting, this is going to be a little bit like sipping out of a fire hose, and I apologize, but we're around and we can help provide you more supportive information. But the MD Care Act was first passed in 2000, signed into law in 2001, reauthorized in 2008, and amended in 2014. And essentially what it did is it dramatically increased the federal investment into the muscular dystrophies. And what that means is before it was passed, there was about $9 million going into muscular dystrophy research. And now there's over $100 million federally going into muscular dystrophy research annually. But the back of the envelope calculation for how much money is going into Duchenne research, which includes industry investments, federal investments, is $4 billion. So we like to say it takes a crowd to draw a crowd. So the signing of that bill really brought people to the table and made people pay attention to Duchenne. The development of international care standards, and Kathi is going to talk more about that, and you've been hearing more about that in the conference. The initiation of a federal coordinating committee. We wanted everybody who touches Duchenne, all the federal agencies who touch Duchenne, to sit around the table together and map out an action plan and meet twice a year about it, and that's been happening. And the establishment of collaborative research networks, and again, that's been happening. We initiated and formalized the Duchenne Drug Development Roundtable. And that's a pre-competitive consortia of our Duchenne industry partners who come together to identify shared priorities, shared challenges, and shared opportunities to move the field forward. And as you can imagine, that's really novel. And we're very fortunate to have companies in our community that want to work together and are so committed to Duchenne that we have such a cooperative space. And in fact, we do an annual meeting here at this meeting of those companies. So we're very fortunate to have so many committed industry partners. We have led a very robust patient-focused drug development initiative and effort. And we've done a lot of work to, as a community, innovate in this space. But essentially, in 2012, with the reauthorization of the Food and Drug Administration Safety Innovation Act, or FDASIA, depending on how you pronounce it, an element of that bill was called PDUFA. There was an act called PDUFA, or PDUFA 5. And out of that came patient-focused drug development, or the concept that patients should be at the table and that patient data should be central in decision-making for regulators. And we became innovators within that concept. So much so that FDA wasn't even sure what to do with all the data we were bringing forward. And I'm going to talk about how we dealt with that next. But under PFDD, is the acronym, we developed white papers, patient preference studies, which Ryan's going to talk about. The Duchenne Registry has informed a lot of those efforts. We led a draft guidance for industry, which is the first time a patient community has written guidance for industry, and FDA then finalized that guidance. And that was a little bit of FDA kind of challenged us to do it. We did it, and they were like, oh my God, they did it. And it's been very highly regarded, and other communities have come behind and done it also. And so we should be very proud of the fact that we really took this PFDD notion and transformed it into a movement. But then what ended up happening is that there wasn't a next step for PFDD when our products were moving through regulatory approval. So what we found was that there wasn't a way for all of this data that we were generating to make the regulatory impact that we intended for it to make. So while we were sitting at the table with decision makers at FDA around PFDD, what we wanted was that the reviewers who were actually looking at the products and making decisions about whether a product would be approved or not would actually have access to that data. And that hadn't happened yet. So we were sort of moving faster than this pipeline allowed for as far as our scaffolding. So we decided to keep building the scaffolding ourselves. So if for those of us who were with us in June of 2015, remember at our annual conference, we worked with our congressional champions and we introduced legislation. And we all went to the Hill together. We went in front of the Capitol and we had a little rally. We introduced a bill called the Patient-Focused Impact Assessment Act. And that bill was passed and signed into law. And that essentially meant that all of this data that we were bringing forward, we wanted to know. We wanted a report card. We wanted to know how it was being used by reviewers. And that's now happening. And there's all the detail that I'm just talking about without showing my slides. But that's now happening. The other thing, though, is that there's a framework that FDA reviewers use when reviewing a product. And again, we wanted to make sure that all this data was being incorporated into that actual framework. So again, we introduced a bill because sometimes if FDA says no, we say, we'll make you. And so we introduced another bill, and this bill passed in the Senate, but not in the House, so it wasn't signed into law. But we did have buy-in from the commissioner and others. And so what's happened since then is FDA is writing a lot of guidances that have come since the passage of the 21st Century Cures Act and PDUFA 6. So there were a lot of other legislative efforts that were underway. Some of our provisions or bills were worked as provisions into these other massive pieces of legislation. And guidances are coming out of this. This is sort of FDA's way of implementing policy changes. And we're seeing elements of benefit worked into those guidances. So we have a lot of cooperation and buy-in from FDA. And I have to say, FDA really, it's almost like the script has flipped, has continued to come back to us and say, what else, what more, are we doing what we need to be doing? What else should we be thinking about? And I think Pat even alluded to that earlier. We've really had really wonderful engagement with FDA. And that's now not just with CDER, it's also with CBER, which is the division that's really incredibly important in gene therapies. Okay. All right, so here's that pipeline again. And now the pathway. And this is what it looks like now with all the work that we had been doing. But it turns out, once we got to approvals, there's a lot more that happens after an approval. There are a lot more stakeholders, and there's a whole other access and reimbursement ecosystem. So what we needed to be doing, and what we have been doing, is a whole other body of work, because there are other decision makers who we need to ensure have the right data about the Duchenne experience in front of them to inform their decision making. Because if we're not doing that, then they're making decisions about more generic, based on data from other diseases, other patient communities, or just bad data. And what then we find is denials or policies that actually don't reflect the Duchenne experience, and that's not acceptable. So the first thing is we moved for an ICD code, or an International Classification of Disease, that was specific to Duchenne and Becker, because at the time, the way that Duchenne and Becker were classified was with a broader classification of muscular dystrophies. And why that's important is when a payer or when a health system would go to make a cost estimate on how much it costs to add a product or add a wheelchair benefit or add any health intervention to a policy, it would be based on an estimate of a broader population of patients than just those with Duchenne and Becker. And so we needed to make sure that the data they were pulling was specific to our community. We also held a Duchenne patient-focused Compass meeting. Many of you may remember this. This was March in 2018. This was an externally led PFDD meeting that we held in collaboration with the FDA. But we took the framework that FDA had built for this, and we asked them if we could expand it out to all of the federal agency partners that we've been working with. to really reflect what's been happening in our space. We wanted to bring payers in. We wanted CMS there. We wanted Beyond Cedar. We wanted CBER, again, looking to gene therapies. We wanted Social Security Administration. We wanted all these agencies who we worked with, and we really wanted to focus on the Duchenne experience now. That was a very powerful meeting. Many of you testified at that meeting, and we've been using the data coming out of the meeting on the Hill and with those federal agency partners to really move our Duchenne community forward. As we've mentioned in this meeting, we've launched the National Newborn Screening Program. We actually launched the initiative in 2015 to build an infrastructure for national newborn screening. We did a lot of the groundwork so that once we would have a federal nomination, we could then move to state implementation faster. But right now what we've done is funded a state pilot in a state with a high birth rate, which is New York State. That launched in 2018. The past few months have been around building infrastructure, and the first baby screened will be this summer. And that has been funded through a pre-competitive consortia of partners, which includes Sarepta, PTC, WAVE, Solid, PerkinElmer, Pfizer, and PPMD. Okay, payer engagement and access navigation. And this could be a whole day long on its own, but it's going to be a couple seconds. So we've been engaging directly with payers, both commercial, state, Medicaid, and it turns out there are actually 55 Medicaid states. Who knew there were 55 states? But for those of you, and I know we have some partners in the room that do a lot of state engagement, you all know. We've also been working to facilitate and help families navigate access as well as clinicians, so the exchange of best practices, because as you all know, this is not an easy lift. Kathi helped coordinate the publication of a clinician consensus statement about the approval and access of approved therapies, and we launched an Access Resource Center. But the other big arena that we've been engaged in is the evaluation arena and health economics. And why that's important is because there's a whole world of decision makers who determine what's of value. So whether or not it's of value to approve a wheelchair for you, whether or not it's of value to approve a steroid for you, whether or not it's of value that hospitalization should be paid for, whether or not it's a value that you should have a flu shot. But now that we have innovative therapies coming, these evaluators are making decisions. And they're making decisions based on a lot of factors. And we want to make sure that the frameworks that they're using and the data that they're using is informed by Duchenne experts, methodologists who know Duchenne, and recent data. And some of what goes into that are therapy benefits, the innovation that was used, outcomes. We had a really great session on outcomes earlier, burden of disease data. And so we've spent a lot of time, but one of the things that we've realized is that some of the elements, the data elements that they use to determine whether something's of value really don't reflect value elements that matter to patients. They also don't look at impacts or benefits to caregivers or other people living in the family. They really look at an N of one, the benefit to the individual, but not realizing that if you were to improve quality of life for an individual with Duchenne, you're also improving quality of life for people in the household. So we've really done a lot of work through coalition work and through engagement with some of these stakeholders to try and shift some of what's considered in these value equations. And then just last month, we convened an outcomes meeting. So there was a really great panel earlier about outcomes. Those outcomes were really all being discussed in the context of clinical trials, which is incredibly important, and are discussions that are had for over long periods of time with FDA and regulators. But what we have really found, and Ryan and I spend a lot of time talking to payers, and once you get into the access environment, payers will say, well, those are not necessarily all the data points that we're also interested in. So there's additional data that we would like to understand and know about. So PPMD convened a meeting to bring payers and health technology assessors and industry and FDA all together, and our methodologists all together, to start to talk about what outcomes should we be collecting holistically so we can not just be informing clinical trial data collection, the regulatory decision-making, but this whole bottom swerve and edge so that we make sure that we have data to inform the access environment as well, so that once a product's approved, we can make those access decisions easier and more reflective of the patient community who needs access to those therapies. All right, so I am almost done. So now this is what we look like. So that's what's happening, and that's why you get all these alerts and texts and blogs, and that's what we're doing. And that's what you're doing. And so whenever we ask for you to complete a survey or do an action alert, it's because of this. And because we are very much a patient-powered community working to ensure that decisions that are made by decision makers are patient-centered and not patient-centered. And we have to keep this flowing and keep this strategy going. And we are grateful to all of you for making this possible. And this is a slide that Ryan uses that I've amended a little bit to this new pathway to say that we feel strongly that the patient voice can inform this pathway so that our opinions, our experience should be incorporated in labeling considerations and disease burden and payer determinations in the lower edge of this pipeline, just as they are right now, as we talk about them in symptom priorities and the clinical trial considerations. So I think we've done a really good job at the top edge, and what we're really working on right now is making sure that we are embedded in this right side and the bottom edge. So, and I'm finished, so thank you.
Hi, my name's Kathi Kinnett, and I am responsible for care. So my history is that I'm a nurse practitioner, and I left Cincinnati Children's Hospital, where I had the pleasure of working with Brenda Wong and Con Hoare and Linda Kripe and a host of other amazing providers, and we're able to care for more than 300 patients living with Duchenne and families living with Duchenne. When I joined PPMD in 2012, one of the frustrations that I heard the loudest from parents was access to care. Where do we go to get care? Where do we go where we know that they know how to take care of Duchenne? Where do we know that they have experience caring for patients with Duchenne? So we set about to talk to centers and see which centers were out there that were capable of providing comprehensive care. Annie talked about the MD Care Act. The MD Care Act gave great recommendations for care for Duchenne, but had no method by which to integrate those care standards or to evaluate those care standards to make sure that people in the centers were actually following those standards of care. So we were fortunate and worked very hard to create the Certified Duchenne Care Center program. The Certified Duchenne Care Center program is a network of 25 programs across the country that are capable of providing comprehensive Duchenne care in agreement with the CDC care guidelines. You'll see that there are some holes in the country. We're working on those holes very actively to try to work with centers that are capable of providing that level of care. It's a robust program, and so we want to make sure that those centers that we certify all are providing the same level of care and services, so that if you go to Seattle, you will get the same care and services as if you go to Duke. There should be no difference, maybe delivered slightly different way, but the care and services will be the same at any of the centers. We also have one global certified Duchenne Care Center in South Africa, and we're very proud of that. That's a group that's worked very hard to provide care and services to a needy population, and a population that's in a part of the world that doesn't get a lot of attention. So we're very happy that they're certified as well. So again, we have 25 certified centers. We have one global center. We have a new population, which is fabulous. Adults living with Duchenne. It's great. But now we have to care for them, which is our responsibility. The new care guidelines that were released from the CDC in 2018 include guidelines for comprehensive care across the lifespan, so from diagnosis all the way through adulthood. Many of the certified centers that we certified initially were certified using pediatric guidelines. We've now instituted an application, developed an application that includes guidelines for adult care. And we've piloted that application, done a site visit, and we hope to have the first certified adult center this summer, and I doubt that that will be the only one. We have a couple of, at least 3 other centers in the CDCC network that care for a significant population of adults, and we're hoping to certify those centers for adult care as well. And then again, we have an expanded global effort. We have the certified center in South Africa, which is fabulous. Once we certified that center, we had about 7 other countries that came to us and said, hey, we want to be certified too. I'm only one person, and I don't speak a lot of languages, so it's going to be really important that we enlist the efforts of people across the globe and global advocacy organizations that can assist us in this effort. Right now we're working with the World Duchenne Organization to develop a plan, a method to evaluate and do site visits and hopefully certify other centers across the globe. We've done one pilot site visit with them just in this past month, and we're hoping to certify them as well. We will continue to guide this effort until we're sure that the World Duchenne Organization is capable of taking this over and will manage this effort in the same way that we manage it, so that again, care in these these global centers is again the same as the care and services in the U.S. centers. So as Anessa said in her slide, we have more than 700 healthcare providers. 80% of these CDCCs are major clinical trial sites, which is amazing. But as Cliff and Craig alluded to in the last panel presentation, if patients that are in clinical trials aren't receiving the same standards of care, then the clinical trial outcomes from those patients at those centers aren't going to be as strong. So the goal is to standardize the care across those patients who are all seen at the centers that are doing clinical trials. Everybody gets the same care, everybody's in the same trial, then we can compare apples to apples instead of apples to oranges. Even centers that aren't running clinical trials are major referral sources. So if you're seen at a center that isn't doing clinical trials and you talk to them about clinical trials, then they'll refer you to another center. But they know the center that's receiving you knows that you're getting the same level of care and services because you're seen at a CDCC. Does that make sense? So once we certify a center, the certification is good for 5 years, but what we want to do is make sure that all of these centers are maintaining their level of standards that we saw when we did the site visit and did their certification. So at least once a year, we check in with the center. We check in with them many more times than that, but at least once a year, we go back with the recommendations and the suggestions that we made during the site visit, and we see what progress they've made, what changes have been made in the staff and faculty, what changes have been made in clinical practice. And then we want to make sure that the community is aware of what's happening at those centers before they go to the center for care, at least that year. So once or twice a year if we can, we publish a biannual report that demonstrates the changes in faculty and staff and changes in clinical practice at all of the certified centers. And that was just published. So I'm sure that you'll see, you can look online and find that report right now. It will give all the information about each of the certified centers. If you have any questions about that report, let me know. We really appreciate your voice, and your voice is the final step in this closed loop process that lets us know what's happening at the certified centers. So we depend on your input. So we need your perception of what's happening at your centers. So the way we get that is through the clinical experiences survey. So each of the certified centers will ask you annually to complete a clinical experiences survey. It's anonymous, and it comes back to us. We aggregate all of those results, and then we give those results back to the center. We use the results as a certification committee to evaluate whether there are any red flags at the center. So if one person said, oh, I didn't get that or that didn't happen, then we don't care too much, well, we care. but we don't jump up and down. But if 5 people come to us and say, that's not happening at the center, then we're going to go back to the center and say, this isn't happening, so please explain to us why this isn't happening and let us know how you're going to fix this. The centers use these reports for continuous quality improvement, and the biannual report was just published as well, and it looks like this that you can't read, but just to pull out a little bit of this information, there were 363 surveys that we collected between January and January, and of these, some of the things that we can tell are that 241 people are taking steroids, 86 are on prednisone, 139 are on deflazacort. That's important for a lot of reasons. 180 people are taking daily steroids, and 50 are taking weekend. And we didn't ask, we can go back then to that report and see how many of those people were using deflazacort on weekends, how many were using prednisone on weekends. And then we look at standards of care. So the care guidelines say that you need a PFT once a year. 94% of people said that they got that. And 92% of people said they had cardiac imaging. So we can tell from the clinical experiences survey, which is not perfect, that people are receiving or report receiving a standard of care. We know that 69% of people had clinical trials discussed with them. Now that means that there were a significant number that did not have clinical trials discussed with them, but we don't know how many of those people were in clinical trials. We could go back and run that report as well. But just the fact that almost 70% of people had clinical trial opportunities discussed with them is a significant amount of people. 75% were encouraged to update their information in the registry, which is incredibly important. We need that information so that we can let all of you know what clinical trials are happening. So that's important that we continue that. And we know that 97% of people who are seen at the CDCCs reported that they're either very satisfied or satisfied with their care. As Anessa said, we do also use the Certified Center Network to address gaps in care. One of the significant issues for all of you living with Duchenne are contractures. And contractures we know happen sometimes regardless of how much stretching you do or how much you're using braces or no matter what you're doing to try to prevent contractures. So we organized or convened a meeting with the NIH and with the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab in Chicago to look at at neuromuscular diseases to include Duchenne about the development of contractures as well as ways to possibly delay the onset of contractures or prevent contractures. And then if contractures actually occur, way to care for those contractures and to maintain that degree of contracture and not allow them to get worse. That summary is in process and should be published really soon. One of the other things that came out of that meeting were updated PT videos. We realized that we have PT videos online, which are fabulous from Helen Passelt, but they're old. So we wanted new PT videos, and those have just been finished and are in the process of being edited and will be online really soon. And then we have a brand new PT handout for parents and professionals that will let you know what you need to do for the care and maintenance of children with Duchenne at home in both physical therapy and as far as stretching. So we don't sit still very long. Amanda Wilkinson works with me very closely and is primarily responsible for the Duchenne tours. She's done a yeoman's job. Over the past 4 years, we've had 26 in-person and 1 virtual tour. And these Duchenne tours are small conferences, for lack of a better word, that allow parents who are unable for whatever reason that year or ever to come to a conference to get the same kind of information that you're getting over these 3 days, but in a condensed version and closer to home. So we're very proud of the fact that we've been able to do this amount of outreach. We're also working on Spanish resources. Amanda is in the process right now of putting together a virtual tour that will be in Spanish and recorded and available as a webinar so that patients and people who aren't able to understand necessarily an English tour can get the same information in Spanish. We have a lot of online resources. We've worked on the imperatives for Duchenne, which are a 1-page snapshot of Duchenne care. Again, we have emergency cards that Kim spoke about in English and Spanish. Children's Mercy Hospital used the Liaison Grant one year to develop the wheelchair emergency cards, which were fabulous, and they generously shared that resource with us, and we've been, through a generous donor, able to print those that resource, and they're available here in English and Spanish as well. And then the PJ Nikolov steroid protocol is available for patients that need information about stress dosing and weaning and conversion from deflazacort to prednisone. So there are a host of resources that we continuously try to figure out what the gaps in care are and to meet those gaps. Again, online resources, the updated family guide that goes along with the updated care guidelines is available. Emergency information is constantly being updated. We just updated the MMR and vaccine recommendation. You may have seen that in a blog. Many people are going to camp, and the camp said, you can't come unless you've had your MMR, and many patients hadn't had their MMR because it's a live vaccine, and once they started steroids, they were encouraged not to get live vaccines. So we discussed ways that the patients could get that vaccine and then have access to camp. New diagnosis information is coming. We have updated subspecialty information that we release regularly, and Education Matters, which has been an incredibly important resource for schools and teachers and parents, is being updated as well. So as we roam around the country in certify centers and visit centers, we realize that care providers work in silos as well, and they all wanted to meet each other, and they want to work together as a network. So we formed the Healthcare Professionals Summit. We've had 2 meetings in 2018. We reviewed the updates in the care guidelines, and then in 2019, we worked on building collaborations across the network, across subspecialties, to allow subspecialists and healthcare providers to work together to mitigate some of the challenges and barriers to both providing care and conducting clinical trials. We will do that again this year in 2020. It's January 23rd to the 25th. It's healthcare care providers only. They've all been given the dates, so we hope that all of your certified center providers are there. And then care is in the middle of everything. I think you've heard that before. The platform trial, we need the network and standardized care in order to make that a success. Access to therapies. Annie mentioned that all of the certified center directors got together and developed a letter that encouraged access to approved therapies. The ICD-10 code, the ICD-10 code is the code that you get when you go to the physician that says what your primary and secondary diagnosis is, and it's what they use for billing. So the development of an ICD-10 code for dystrophinopathy is incredibly important, because now we can bill according to dystrophinopathy as a primary diagnosis. The other thing it does for providers, however, is allow them to go into their electronic health record and pull data from everybody that has that ICD-10 code. So while before everybody had a little Excel sheet where they kept all their patients and their patient data, now they can go into their electronic health record, pull all the data for all the patients that have the ICD-10 code, and then we can aggregate that data across centers so that we can start to look at aggregations of data and mass data rather than silos of data that aren't necessarily standardized and in a collection manner. So that's an important part. When newborn screening is incredibly important, but we have to have a way and a place to care for those little people. So the certified centers will be an important resource for those families as well. So continued progress. Newborns, decode Duchenne, we now do carrier testing as well as patient testing. We will continue to work to combine the patient-reported outcome and the EHR data. We will continue to pull reports from the EHR using the ICD-10. We will continue to integrate the CDCC network with the platform trials, and we will continue to expand both adult and global care. And we had just had a meeting talking about females with dystrophinopathy. They all are going to need care as well, and then newborn care. So this just continues to explode. So I have a big job to do. We all have big jobs to do. Thanks for all of your part, and I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Kathi. I'm going to close out this session on addressing the complexity of Duchenne. I'm going to try to shorten my presentation, which might be hard, but I'm going to do my best because I don't want you to lose your stretch break. I'm going to be talking about the importance of the patient voice and incorporating that voice into all aspects of drug development and review. It's something we feel strongly about and have advocated for the inclusion of your input, your perspectives, from drug discovery on through delivery. And we work to facilitate engagement with you so you can contribute actual data in order to inform that pipeline and that pathway Annie was talking about. So I actually want to start with a story about a meeting I was recently attending, and it was a meeting about value in healthcare. And it was focused on value in healthcare from the patient perspective, but it was mainly health economists and drug developers and other people speaking, not many patient advocates in the room. But the speaker on stage said the following. He said, "The value placed on the benefits and risks of any treatment can only truly be understood by patients and caregivers themselves, for it's they who make the treatment choices, they who bear the associated risks." And everyone was nodding their head, which was good to see. They were in agreement. But this was sort of my reaction. So, obviously, the patient voice is so key to us understanding the value of therapies. But you may be surprised that this viewpoint really only our more recent history is becoming more commonplace, commonly held by those in drug development, healthcare decision-making, and even FDA in drug review. And it really took an act of Congress, a lot of advocacy to ensure that the FDA was actually taking a more structured approach, a transparent approach to incorporating your perspectives into drug development and review. And that was further clarified with 21st Century Cures, as Annie was describing, to include the addition of patient experience data. So this is why we do what we do, and this is why we ask you to contribute data in a number of different ways. Because the truth is, there is a gap between the clinical trial data that may come out, the scientific data, and the actual patient experience. And by contributing data and by taking surveys and giving us your input and participating in meetings, you help actually bridge that gap. You can help fill in the gaps about things like the disease burden, the unmet need, what outcome measures actually mean to you, and what's meaningful benefit, your preferences for benefits and risks, symptom priorities, quality of life, and meaningful benefit. And what we found is this doesn't just have implications for the regulatory context. This isn't just important for FDA. It can impact the full arc of drug development. And we try to facilitate ways to collect this data and inform all stakeholders in our ecosystem. And there are many ways to actually collect data from the patient community, and there are two main categories to data collection. One is called qualitative data, and this does a really good job at describing. It's usually observational, not numerical, and you all participate in qualitative data. It's focus groups, open-ended surveys, testimonies, interviews, town halls like we're going to do at the end of the conference. And then quantitative data, it does a better job at defining, and together it helps make sense of what we're seeing in the data. And those are done through patient registries, PROs, as has been described before by Cliff and others, quality of life instruments, and polling data like we're going to do today, and surveys. And then there's a way to do both. We've actually spent a lot of time and investment on preference studies. These are specialized surveys that help us better understand how you think and feel about emerging therapies and helps quantify the patient voice. And we've been doing these for some time. We've done 5 studies to date, one on caregiver preferences, one on symptom priorities, meaningful pulmonary outcomes. We did a multi-stakeholder preference study actually here in Orlando 3 years ago, where we had physicians and drug developers take our preference study. We recently completed one on gene therapies, and we have a global preference study underway with 6 countries because decision makers across the world are interested in how preferences may differ across countries. And we've been collaborating with Dr. John Bridges, who's actually here this weekend, who's at the Ohio State, and his colleague Noni Croson here, who's with Johns Hopkins, and Holly P.A., who's been working with us for many years. And we couldn't do any of this work without our partners, and they not only have helped fund this work, but they they actually participate in the stakeholder advisory board process, so they help inform the actual survey development. And this is all done in collaboration with patients, caregivers, researchers, and other stakeholders. We take a very community-engaged approach to doing these surveys. So we do these by the use of what's called stated preference methods. These are just specialized surveys, and the methods allow us to collect and analyze data of what you think and feel. And they allow us to quantify, essentially, how much bad are people willing to accept for the good, or how much risk will a person tolerate given a particular benefit. And really, how do people prioritize things among important factors when making decisions. And here's just a look at some of those stated preference methods. This one was from our first survey on caregivers. Here you see a range of benefits. I don't even think you can see that from there, but there's a range of benefits and risks in a hypothetical treatment profile, and we ask you what is best and what's worst about this treatment profile, and then whether or not you would actually give that to your child. And it allows us to understand the relative importance of these items, how you potentially could make trade-offs on benefits and risks, and how you value them. And then here's another example where it's called a discrete choice experiment, where there's drug A versus drug B. Again, there's a level of benefit. There's a series of different attributes like risks and uncertainties, and you're telling us which drug you prefer. And again, at the end, this lets us quantify how you're thinking, and it lets us survey a large group of patients and justify some of the qualitative data we see in the interviews, the testimonies, and other methods. So some of the themes we've learned from these studies and we've been able to communicate to regulators and drug developers and other decision makers is that stopping or slowing disease progression are both valued treatment outcomes, and patients and caregivers are willing to accept risk and uncertainty in order to achieve these outcomes. That you prioritize protection of muscle function and treatments targeting secondary symptoms like cardiac and pulmonary most, and are willing to take on risks and burdens and uncertainty to receive the benefit. But at the end of the day, that preferences may actually differ between those with Duchenne, Becker, their caregivers, and the professionals who are actually providing treatment options to patients and delivering medical care. You may value a benefit or a risk different than your physician, and that's why shared decision-making is so important when you're in the clinic. And that ultimately what we've learned from these surveys is that on the studies around clinical trial decision-making, the chance for benefit is the main driver for your decision-making on whether or not to actually join these studies. That's why it's so hard when there's placebo in a lot of these trials. So why this matters: allows us to engage a larger group of community members in what we call patient-centered research. We can better communicate to a range of people in our ecosystem how you think and feel about benefits and risks and treatment priorities. And the truth is, preferences change over time. So as new knowledge, new treatment options come on board, we're going to be surveying you. So I know you might get sick of taking these surveys, but they do matter, and they do help us better communicate to all those stakeholders that are important in that ecosystem about what your priorities and preferences are. We have a global study underway, like I mentioned, in 6 countries right now with Dr. John Bridges that we're very excited about, and we hope to complete by the end of the year. And we appreciate everyone that's contributed data to date on a number of these studies over the years. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit to the Duchenne registry. This is yet another way you contribute data. In this case, you're informing the natural history of the disease. And the Duchenne registry has really grown and evolved over time, and we are really looking at the next phase of the Duchenne registry and what we have to do. For those who are not as familiar, these 2 lovely ladies lead the registry, Ann Martin and Jen Ely. It's an online self-reported registry for those with Duchenne, Becker, as well as carrier females, and was established in 2007, and it's the largest global patient registry. The aims, while have evolved and reflected the current environment in drug development, really focus on 4 distinct areas: informing and understanding the natural history, looking at patient resources and providing free genetic counseling and testing, and tools to inform you to make your decisions on clinical trials, drug development, recruiting for studies, of course, and prep to trial, and then using the data we collect to inform everybody in our community, all stakeholders, to inform the work you're all doing. So we have 5,000 plus registrants. I think people have mentioned this already. The mutation breakdown that's been reported and verified by our genetic counselors really does match up with the literature. And we ask you to fill out a series of modules, essentially, about your condition and your health care. Over 5,000 registrants, 115 countries represented, 100 plus trials and studies recruited for, and we've been collecting data over 12 years, and we produced a 10-year report not very long ago on what we're learning, and we're actually still analyzing some of that data because it's so much data. So as we hit the 10-year mark, we began to look at really a phase 2 of our registry, and what do we need to do? What did we learn from these last 10 years? What can we do better? And how can we enable better patient engagement tools? So what we were excited to announce several months back is a partnership with Thread Research, where the registry is going to essentially change to an app-based technology, allowing for easier entry, more consistent entry of data over time. It's so important to get consistent entry of what they call longitudinal data for us to really understand what's happening in the progression. And this is also going to enable our young men and young women to play a larger role in the registry. We think this is going to be a better tool for those with Duchenne. Just a look at some of the screens of how you'll be able to enter the data with ease. You'll be receiving alerts, submitting the data over time, and you'll be able to do that right from your mobile device. And the consent process is very clean, very clear, and you'll be sent information over time about trials and all the good things that still come with the registry. So as we transitioned into a new access environment with 2 newly approved therapies, we began to look at what more could be done with data collection and understanding now in a real-world environment with those newly approved therapies, how it's impacting patients from your perspective and how you could play a role to provide data on your experience with those products. And we announced several months back the formation of Duchenne Outcomes Research Interchange. This is a new data warehouse that will combine several sources of data. It'll include a combination of patient-reported data, clinician data on approved products, and data from electronic health records. And the whole point here is to bring that data together and analyze it. And we partnered with Sarepta Therapeutics to launch the interchange. We've been working on this for some time now. The Duchenne registry will be the first patient-reported data in the interchange, and we're looking to match that with electronic health records. And then data from patients on Exondys 51 will be the first post-market surveillance data to come into the registry, the interchange rather. And we're trying to build a model here. Traditionally, data is siloed in registries around the world. We're trying to come up with a way to combine all of these efforts, patient-reported electronic health records, and post-market data so that we can understand it, publish on it, and disseminate it in a timely fashion. So PPMD is also looking to enhance our own Duchenne registry data with an electronic health record pull. And here's how this is going to work. When you actually register with the new Duchenne registry through the app, which is coming early fall, you'll actually consent with us to be able to pull from your institution your electronic health records that exist at that institution. This is your data. In our view, you have the right to push and pull that data where you wish. And if you want to inform research and drug development with that, you should have that right. So you're going to consent to do that. If you complete the consent, you'll be giving permission to pull that data. We'll provide a consented list to the institutions that you are being seen at. That's why it's important to give us that information. We'll prepare that list through what's called a HIPAA-compliant data transfer. Institution gets that information and shares with PPMD the data elements from the patients through what's called the secure API. It's just a fancy way of saying pipes, and they bring the data through that API, and it goes into the Duchenne interchange. So that's ingested in. So here's just another look at that. You're a patient at the Duchenne registry in Springfield Hospital. You consent to push your EHR along with the PRO data, the Duchenne registry data, plus your electronic health record data, goes through the API, commingled in the Duchenne interchange. And then the institution actually gets their own login to see this data and compare it to de-identified data in the system. And the good news is we're not asking them to start their own new database and enter anything new in. This is existing data. We're just asking them to pull it. Okay, you need water. So the Evolve registry is Sarepta's registry on approved therapies. They've set this up in order to collect data on their approved products, including, of course, their first Exondys 51. And the point here is for them to, they're standing up their own registry. We talk to them about how can we combine our efforts in order to meld together what's happening with data collection in the PRO space. They're already enrolling sites in the Evolve registry, and we're excited to partner with them for them to be the first post-market registry data set to come in. Here's how this will work with the Sarepta data. You've got PPMD's Duchenne registry, PRO data, of course, coming in still. You've got the electronic health records, and then data from the Evolve registry coming in. That's melded together, de-identified data, so your personal information is protected, and then that's analyzed, published on, and disseminated so we can better understand your real-world experience on these products and how they may compare to the natural history of those not on these products. So we're really excited about this effort. What you need to know now in terms of the Duchenne registry is when you want to visit Interaction Alley at our conference and update your information if it needs to be with our genetic counselors. So which clinic you're currently receiving your care, provide us with the most up-to-date email, and be on the lookout this summer for emails from us. For those on Exondys 51, you'll be notified by your clinic, and you can, of course, ask them if they're participating in the Evolve registry. Okay, how am I doing? All right, conference polling. So once again this year, we're going to do polling, which we're really excited about. This was very successful last year. You'll see on your agenda several times where I'm going to come up and do some live polling throughout the conference. It's important to note this year, the polling is just for family members. So those with Duchenne or Becker, caregivers, siblings, parents. The goal is to better understand from your perspective a range of topics, add additional insights for discussion taking place during the conference, and inform things like drug development trials and care through the lens of you. Guidelines take place today, tomorrow, and Saturday. Those watching on the live stream, you're able to do the polling as well. To participate, here's the website. You can go on your phones. You can do that now and go to pollev.com/ppmd. We're looking at John Dudley to make sure I have that right. Okay. And if you don't have wireless, if you're not hooked into the wireless yet, it's PPMD 2019. Polling questions, like I said, this is for families this year. Some questions require only one response per family. We will indicate when we only need one response. Otherwise, everybody in the family could answer. And of course, answers are anonymous. So don't worry, we're not, putting on the screen exactly what you all are saying. So be candid. It's just some polling advice. Don't fall victim to peer pressure with answers on the screen. Answer the question on your phone first, and then look up the answers, because the answers are going to appear live. So we don't want that to influence your answers at the end of the day. Don't look at your neighbor's responses. Cheating is never a good thing. I think it's important that, just be honest. It's okay. This isn't a test. No one's getting graded. But we appreciate all those willing to take part in the polling, and hopefully we'll have more and more families in the room for additional questions. All right, so we have a couple warm-ups to start. And I think, can you get the first warm-up question up? Okay. Would you rather be able to speak all languages or be able to speak to animals? That's your first question. It's a hard one, I know. I'm going to give you a minute just to get used to the technology and get comfortable with it. Huh? Oh, sure. It's polev.com/ppmd. polev.com/ppmd. Let me know if you need me to say that again. We're getting in? Okay, it's looking like languages, although I would have said animals, but. There's also a text option as well, you see there on the screen. Can you see the screen okay? Yeah, I can't see it that well from here. Looks like it's slowing down. Anyone else having problems with the technology? I want to make sure everyone can access it. Okay. So, speak all languages. It was pretty close. It looks like still stuff coming through. Okay. I know with time, where are we? 5:02. All right, we're going to move to the next warm-up question. I know I didn't need to do 2 warm-up questions, but with Game of Thrones, I thought this was interesting. Would you rather own a dragon or be a dragon? Oh, look at that. Oh, he owns. What kind of backyards do you people have? Oh, right? That is true. Wow, own a dragon is. Yeah, in the end, we get the numbers at the end of how many people were able to online or offline. Looks like own a dragon is really winning. Okay, so in the interest of time, I think we should move on to some of the real questions because those are probably a little more important. Which describes you? Individual with Duchenne, individual with Becker, parent guardian. Now, if you're a carrier as well, you can answer twice here. You see that at the bottom. We just want to get a sense of the breakdown of family members. Okay, majority is parent or guardian of someone with Duchenne. We have some confirmed carriers or carrier females. Family members, great that there's family members here. Okay. Everyone good? All right, John, I think we can move on to the next question. All right, where are you from? Northeast, southeast, west, southwest, midwest, international. Give you a minute on these. Looks like the Midwest is coming in ahead of the rest. Kathy's happy about that. Some kind people from the Midwest. You're good people. Made from good stock. Okay, still trickling in a little bit, but I think we have the majority of responses that we're going to get now, and I know Kim's probably screaming right now at me. Still coming in. Everyone good? Okay, I think we can move to the next. So we want to know the age bracket of the person affected by Duchenne or Becker. If you have more than one, you're able to choose more than one category, unless they both fall into that, or you fall into another one. So choose the age bracket. This is going to help us later on when we actually stratify across age groups and see if we see any differences in some of the answers of the later questions. Like 9 to 11 is in the lead here, but we have a nice spread. It's great to see a spread of different age groups here. Okay. I think we can move to the next question. What do you hope most to get out of attending the conference? Choose one answer. I know that's hard to choose one. I think the box lunches is one of the things that I really, personally, that horrible potato salad. Looks like learning about research and trials by far and away. And personal connections. I know. I didn't put my own department in advocacy. Sorry. I just figured that would blow everyone away. Okay. It's like learning about trials and research. It's really rising to the top there. Okay, so we can go to the next one, I think. Seems like people are still answering, but we have to move on. Kim will kill me. Okay, next question. So we want to know which of the following types of research you or your child have participated in. You can choose more than one response here. Oh, thank you. Okay. So we're going to do a 5-minute break, right? Yeah. You all get a 5-minute break after this. You're welcome. So looks like nice spread of different research activities people are participating in. I know that we don't have all the families in the room right now, so I'm going to give them dirty looks when we leave this session. But hopefully they'll come back in and be able to fill in more data. But it's great to see natural history studies, investigational drugs, MRIs. You all participate in a number of wonderful things. A lot of it is not just to receive benefit, but to advance our understanding of the disease, which is really important. All right. So with that, we're going to take a 5-minute break, 5 or 6-minute break, and then we're going to come back for a really important session and panel on quality of life with your family. So please come back. Thanks.